Welcome, folks. We're going to give it just a few more minutes as we have some people trickling in, and we're about 2 minutes to the hour. We'll probably get started about a minute to 2 minutes after, so stay tuned. Just about one more minute. I still see folks joining, so we'll get started in 1 minute. Okay, folks, I want to make sure I'm respecting everybody's time, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Credit Union Merger Strategies webinar hosted by CUCollaborate. That's us. My name is Michael Murdoch with CUCollaborate. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded so that we can share with all those who've registered in case you would like to share with others and for anyone who might miss today. I'll also be sending out this slide deck that we'll be going through, so keep an eye out for your inboxes tomorrow. Everyone is muted, but we highly encourage you to share your questions and comments in the chat. We'll be going through a lot of items today, so feel free to toss those in. We do have time at the end for Q&A, but again, please share any questions you have throughout. We'll get to them as we go, and then obviously we'll have time to make sure that we get through them thoroughly. I'll also be putting in a couple of polls into the chat today, so keep an eye out for those as your feedback is super useful. On the next slide, a little bit about what we do here at CUCollaborate. We provide data analytics and consulting, including field of membership expansion, charter conversions, branch strategy, low-income designation, attainment and retainment, CDFI attainment and retainment, merger consulting, and so much more. Our in-depth data analytics offerings provide focus on performance measurement, community benefit and economic impact quantification, regulatory optimization, and market analysis, to name just a few. We additionally are experts at simplifying the process for consumers and organizations to find, join, and borrow from credit unions. And we have software designed to facilitate acquiring new relationships that help with regulatory optimization, et cetera, et cetera. So if any of these resources sound like they may be beneficial to your organization, I'm going to be popping in a meeting link into the chat. You're welcome to schedule time with us to discuss. We'd love to hear from you. And then on the next slide, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Sam Brannell is our founder and CEO. Sam has worked in the credit union industry for well over a decade. And then in 2014, he founded CUCollaborate with the aim of facilitating impactful collaboration within the industry. Next, we have Luis Topico, our chief economist. Luis has specialized in credit unions, their historical and current call report data, and analyzing statistically their performance and products since 2001. So been at it for a while. Our director of partnerships, Ben Herring, has also spent many years in the credit union system, most recently as the director of engagement for the Minnesota Credit Union Network. Ben supported credit unions through the facilitation of educational programming, product and service project management, and providing avenues for collaboration. And last but not least, Emily Hughes, our advisory director, has experience working in local governments with nonprofit and community partners and large federal agencies. So we're really excited to have these experts here with us today. And then on the next slide, before we get started, this is where I'd like to conduct a brief poll to get an idea where your credit union is at in the merger process. So I'm going to pop that in right now. So that should show up here in a second. Please go ahead and answer that to let us know where you're at in that process. This will be throughout the webinar, so if you don't get to it now, that's fine, but we'd love it if you could provide feedback there. And then finally, on the last slide, it's our agenda to give you a brief idea of what we will cover today, including merger trends, credit union merger strategies, and lastly, an overview of CUCollaborate's new merger network, which is pretty exciting. So I've done enough talking. I will hand it over to Luis. Luis, it is all yours.
Hello. Welcome, everyone. We want to talk today about credit union merger strategies, and we thought that a good way to start that would be to look at historical and data trends in mergers. And when people talk about mergers, people can get very heated, can get very emotional, and there are sides to every debate. Sometimes you hear people basically implying that mergers will be the end of the credit union movement. Sometimes you hear people basically implying that mergers are the solution to all the problems in the credit union movement. So what is the truth? It's probably somewhere in between those two things. But the negative aspect of mergers, if you want to call it that, is summarized by this chart here that concerns most everyone in the credit union movement. And it basically shows that for the first 70 years of the credit union movement, we kept adding new credit unions year in, year out. But for the last 50 years or so, the number of credit unions has been inexorably falling from about 24,000 to under 5,000 today. So why has the number of credit unions gone up and then it has gone down? From a mathematical point of view, it's very easy to say. The number goes up when you add more credit unions than when you remove them. And you might say, okay, that's not the most piece of genius you ever heard. But if we could go to the next slide, there is actually some point to that simple analytics, which is to say, let's differentiate the number of credit unions added from the number of credit unions that are removed. And when you look at this chart, the picture that comes through is that in the credit union movement, we don't have a crisis of too many credit unions exiting. What we have is a crisis of not enough entry. So for instance, through the 1960s, we were adding more than 1,000 credit unions per year. If you look at the chart, you can see the green line. If you squint a lot, you might be able to notice it flickering a little, but essentially it looks like the level of entry over the last 30 years has been about zero. And what that means is that even though we are having fewer exits than we used to have, the number of exits today is way lower than in the 70s or in the 80s, because we are not adding any credit unions. The number of credit unions keeps falling. So that's one way of saying that exit is normal. We don't have an exit problem. Some degree of exit, some credit unions run their lives, and they come to the conclusion that they cannot continue to operate independently. That's something normal in every industry. The problem that we have in the credit union industry, which is a subject for another day, is one of entry. Next slide, please. So this slide tries to investigate a little the types of exits that we had. We are all familiar with credit union mergers. Basically, the overwhelming majority, more than 90% of the decline in the number of credit unions over the last 30 years has been due to mergers. But that hasn't always been the case. The main way that credit unions would exit the industry used to be through voluntary liquidations. With the advent of insurance in 1970, the regulators basically pushed credit unions into mergers instead of saying, oh, okay, let's liquidate and have to figure out whether members are owed, so on and so forth. So next slide, please. This repeats the same data, but it also shows that as the number of credit unions has fallen, well, the number of mergers, the number of credit unions left to exit keeps falling. So you might remember the number of mergers if you were reading the credit union media years ago. It might have been 300, 200. Right now it's around 150 per year. That doesn't mean that, I mean, numerically there are fewer mergers, but the reason that there are fewer mergers is that there are fewer credit unions to merge. The credit union merger rate, to call it something, has been stable at around 3% for about some 40 years at this point. Next slide, please. So what do credit unions that merge look like? This chart shows you the acquirees, the smaller parties in each merger across sizes. And what this chart highlights is that a lot of mergers involve fairly small credit unions. So out of 338 mergers in the last 2 years, more than 100 had under $10 million in assets. Another 159 had between 10 million and 100 million. So the smaller credit unions dominate the merger space by count. However, since they tend to have fewer assets, you can also see in the northeast of this chart that a small number of mergers, some 29 of them involving credit unions with more than 100 million in assets, involve the large majority of credit union assets and members that have been involved in mergers over in the last 2 years, 68%. Next slide, please. So what does a typical merger look like? Credit union mergers come in all shapes and sizes, but by and large, the large majority of credit unions involve one larger credit union merging with a far smaller credit union. To draw the boundaries somewhere, we define a credit union as an absorption if the acquiree has less than 10% as many assets as the acquirer, and that accounts for 63% of mergers in the last 2 years. There are also mergers of equals that for simplicity we define as those in which the smaller party has at least 50% as many assets as the large ones. There are a small number of transactions, about 6%, but they tend to involve larger institutions. So over the last 2 years, they accounted for about 50% of assets and members involved in mergers. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, the credit union merger issue is one that brings a lot of emotion, controversy, and there are reasons for it. A lot of people find fault with a lot of the ways in which the credit union merger process is taking place. And the truth is that by and large, there's a lot of lack of transparency in how these transactions are happening. If you are deciding, I want to go into a merger and you try to learn how it has happened in the past, it's very hard to find actual detailed data of what other credit unions have done. If you want to look for merger partners, it's very difficult to line up several of them all at once and to be able to get competitive bids from them. Each merger is a little different. There's not a standardized process, and since there's no transparency and since it's hard to obtain information, it's also hard to obtain objective advice and biased advice. And that's part of what we are trying to do with the launch of our credit union merger network. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of data. We're not going to go through it all. You can look at this data later on your own. You can send. You're happy to send to reach out, and we can discuss it in more detail. But historically, the big picture is on a typical merger, the larger credit union has tended to be more dynamic, having better performance financially and from the point of view of members than the smaller party. And this chart provides a lot of information. It also hides a lot of information. This chart provides averages, and what this chart doesn't show directly is that the performance in individual mergers differs very widely. There are some mergers that are very successful. There are some mergers that empirically cannot be said to be very successful. You combine them all, you get an average, and the average tends to have fairly small impacts. How do rates improve after a merger? That is growth affected after a merger? It turns out that you get good results for some credit in some mergers, you get bad results in others, and the averages are not that large. Next slide, please. And we can skip through this one. This slide gives you a little more detail comparing the differences in performance for mergers of equals versus absorptions. And in closing, one thing to point out, one reason why there's a lot of controversy about credit union mergers is that the very strong arguments are made in forms of mergers saying credit unions have an issue with economies of scale. Small credit unions cannot survive. The only way to survive is through mergers into larger institutions. It turns out that the evidence for strong economies of scale in the credit union space is limited. If the evidence for economies of scale were strong, you wouldn't see this blob where you see the credit unions of different sizes and what their non-interest expenses per assets are. You could see a line going from the northwest to the southeast. You do see the average there, the black line that does show that, and it does show that on average, very, very large credit unions have lower costs than very small credit unions. But for the average credit union, it turns out that there are a lot of credit unions of the same size that have far higher and far lower costs. So merging by itself is not necessarily the best way to approach that. So hopefully these few minutes have provided you some nuance in the complicated picture of the merger space, where it likely is not the case that mergers are sure to lead to the end of credit unions, and it is also likely the case that credit unions that mergers are not the solution to all problems, with the truth being nuanced and somewhere in between.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Luis. I'm going to jump in here and talk a little bit more about kind of the things that we have been doing and seeing with credit unions. I will make a comment on one of Luis's slides that on the net change slide, we were involved in a little bit of that flicker in the green line there, helping a few groups start new credit unions. But needless to say, obviously that net change is going toward the consolidation component. And I will also just say for folks on the call here who are data nerds, my portion of the presentation has 0 graphs and charts, much like Luis. So Emily, if you could change it to the next slide here. Want to show a little bit about some some best practices around how to look at and understand what some opportunities might be to find a partner when you're looking at a merger relationship. And so I've had the distinct opportunity to work with Luis hand in hand on prospecting with a number of credit union clients who've asked us to help them understand who might be a good fit to approach. And so we've kind of compiled a number of different things that we would want to do in this activity of understanding who might be a good fit for a relationship like this. And so each one of these sections here are sections and pieces of the holistic approach that we take toward what we call merger prospecting and solicitation. Essentially, Luis will run a bunch of analytics, performance analyses of credit unions as they relate to our credit union who's interested in understanding who might be a good fit here, and show in a quantitative way how a merger relationship might come out to affect the members. And I think that's really the important piece, and I'm sure that that's what Emily and Sam are going to talk about as well, which is ultimately credit unions are organizations that were created to serve the interest of the member, right? And that's what we're really looking for when we go through these processes and these projects is how might we benefit the member? And so whether it's looking at financials and showing, hey, we can provide better deposit and loan benefits. We can provide potentially more interesting or compelling products and solutions that help reach communities that we are not currently serving well, or new geographic regions that we're not currently delving into as much as we would want to. Or on the flip side of this is, might we be able to offer our prospective merger partner better products and services? Maybe we are able to increase the technology. I know that many of our members are looking at wanting and I would say probably needing better and more enhanced data and technology in their hands, right? Might be service facility. It might be just a simple increase in workforce or employee benefits. So that's what we're looking at when we look at how might a relationship of two credit unions coming together benefit the members. Next slide. So the way that we've kind of worked with credit unions, and I would consider, I would implore you as a credit union thinking about this to approach making these connections is, I can't harp on this enough, but as you probably already know, many of you probably already know this, and trying to do this in some way, shape, or form, and may even have more experience than some of us on this call, is a lot of it has to do with relationships and building close connections with the folks that you're hoping to partner with. And so some of the things that we do, especially with credit unions that we may or may not know well, is to identify who are the potential decision makers. I think that's a pretty straightforward process, but what you also want to do is understand who there might be connections to within a credit union, within your own organization, or within the connections in your network that you have, so that when you go to building those relationships and ultimately getting to hopefully a presentation and a discussion around would this make sense and would you want to consider merging with our credit union, that you're already on kind of a solid footing, right? Really hard to provide a presentation on the benefits of merging together when you can't get in front of the people who would help you make those decisions. And so we've kind of identified like a little bit of a workflow or like a roadmap to how we might get in front of folks that would have those conversations with us. So if you could to the next slide, please. Here's a potential outreach approach, one that we've executed in many different ways with credit unions that we've helped here. Again, identifying if there are connections, folks that we already have existing relationships with. Oftentimes, it leads us into some sort of cold calling, email outreach, and identifying how to resonate. How do we help our story get in front of the right people, and then really relationship building. Soft selling. Here's what we've done so far. Here's why we think this is going to be of a benefit, not only to you, your credit union, but most importantly, your credit union members. Determining, again, how to proceed. Usually these relationships take a long time, but know that if you're intentional about it, you can maybe shorten that time frame. And then finalizing your partnership, obviously, once you've had those opportunities to connect with and really sell the idea of this with the merging partner, is where kind of Emily comes in and to help several credit unions with that part of the project. So thanks, Emily.
Hey, thanks everyone. Really happy to connect today. And I'm looking forward, once you reach out, I'm happy to kind of talk through your pain points wherever you are in the merger process. So please, if you have any questions, looking forward to connecting one-on-one. So once a merger partner has been identified and two credit unions have moved on to completing a merger agreement and getting that signed, the next step is to seek approval from regulators and your member. So the approval process is technical. It's going to involve gathering required forms, financial statements, making necessary disclosures. At this juncture, though, I also like to think about it as you've sold each other on the benefits of merging, and now you're going to sell your members and the regulators. And on this front, some of that rationale that went into picking the right merger partner for your credit union is going to be relevant in the approval process, again, both from the member perspective and the regulator's perspective. Some initial considerations for the merger package should include the relative field of membership and charter type of each of the merger partners. So to attain regulatory approval, you need to have field of membership overlap, which we're going to touch on again in a second. Another thing that's really important when planning to begin your merger application is the size of your merger partner. So the NCUA may look for mergers of equals to provide additional insight around the plans that the credit union has in place to blend their larger teams and also seamlessly transition a greater proportion of members. It's also important to keep in mind that acquiring assets over a certain threshold might need to be reported to the Federal Trade Commission. I recommend considering the availability of your core processors to convert or to handle data migration when picking a merger effective date. So with your merger partner, you may want to consider the extent to which you can operate on two systems if you have two systems, and if that's not tenable, the merger effective date should take into consideration, again, like getting on your vendor's calendar. Once some of those initial considerations can have been established, then we can progress to developing a project plan and gathering inputs. Before we hop into the project plan, though, just a few more talking points on field of membership overlap. This is the matrix that the NCUA uses to show requirements for attaining that overlap. Most commonly, when we're working with credit unions, we see one of the partners is making an adjustment to their field of membership as part of the approval process. I think this really speaks to the extent to which I recommend considering FOM overlap as just one piece of identifying a suitable partner. But once your partner has been identified, you want to make sure either you've got that overlap in place already, or both credit unions understand how you're going to get to that overlap. So again, maybe not existing overlap being the most important thing you're considering with potential merger partners, but once you guys are progressing to approval, making sure that you've accounted for this requirement. The merger application components are quite extensive, so just flashing these specs essentially to convey the materiality here. Lots of forms to complete and numerous narrative components. Definitely work with people who have a ton of great merger experiences and they feel so confident with this long list. But if you're brand new to the process, definitely a good exercise to make sure you've read through the list. The NCUA has resources, including checklists that can kind of help you wrap your head around everything that needs to get done. And then I would like to conclude with just a few comments on best practices and considerations with your merger application. So your members are going to be super excited to learn about the additional products and services that they will have available to them subsequent to the merger. They might also be, or like you'd be surprised at the extent to which they're concerned about working with the staff that have maybe like helped them very closely. So if you are retaining teams, this is something definitely to take credit for and highlight, especially in your member communications. We already talked about how field of membership overlap is a requirement for approval, but it is also really advantageous as a way to differentiate yourself amongst other potential merger partners. So if a credit union is considering kind of several different options of partnerships, the one that is going to pursue FOM expansion, be it through a community expansion or an underserved area addition that will capture the communities that they currently serve, really helps that credit union stand out as having a commitment to those members. And then finally, you saw everything that's required to submit as part of the merger application, tons of inputs. And because of this, it's really valuable to assign a project manager just to keep disparate teams like on task and operating against a timeline. So with larger applications or in the context of managing diverse working styles, which can certainly come up with merging two credit unions, having a project manager becomes like even more important. So a project manager, it can be someone from either credit union. So I recommend really considering bandwidth and skill sets. I've also seen two-person teams work really effectively. So one person is representing each of their credit unions and tasked with kind of taking action items back to the organizations and kind of collaborating on the coordination. A neutral third party can be really helpful, again, with those like huge submissions, and especially if your team does not have bandwidth. So that wraps up my comments, and I'll turn it over to Sam.
Thank you, Emily. Next slide. All right. Yeah. So I'm really excited to announce that we are launching a merger network, which aims to solve a few of the problems that we have covered today. So yeah, we will be playing matchmaker between credit unions and using data that has really previously been unavailable in a matchmaking process or solicitation process, or really helping ensure that the mergers that do happen have the greatest impact and benefit the members of each credit union. But I will say this puts a little bit more of an emphasis on the acquirees members. Yeah, next slide. And we are trying to turn the sort of current way that mergers come together on its head. So most mergers really happen from CEO to CEO relationships, or potentially board to chairman, or sort of board chairman and CEO relationship driven, potentially sort of like sales process driven approaches where it's 1-to-1 or maybe 1-to-2 sort of candidate process. And it is a not really competitive process. It's not standardized, transparent. It's ultimately not data driven. And we are looking to reverse that trend. So we've launched a merger network where when we bring in a acquiree or a credit union who is open to being absorbed by another credit union, we run a competitive process that is consistently applied for each acquiree, basically. And it is data-driven and transparent. Next slide. And so when people join the network, they can opt in either as a acquirer, willing to explore mergers of equals, but where they would require having their board represent the majority of the surviving credit union's board members, or on the other side, exploring mergers of equals where their board would be a minority of board members in the surviving credit union, or simply being an acquiree where they may have one board member, but generally little board representation in the surviving credit union. Next slide. So we want to run a survey now and ask the audience sort of like which best defines sort of what you're interested in. It'll be anonymous. I will tell you, I'd be shocked if we have even one person mention being equals minority or acquiree. But that is really to sort of point out that there are many people who are interested in absorbing other credit unions, and fewer credit unions who are interested in being absorbed. I'm actually being proven wrong as the survey goes through. There are credit unions attending who would be willing to explore being acquired. So that is encouraging for us as a company. I'll just say that it might not be as hard as I feared it would be to sort of see both sides of the marketplace, if you will. Next slide. And so what our approach is, that is the new, very different approach than what has been done before, is we are using credit unions' Aries data. So rather than call report data where you're trying to infer things about how credit unions serve their members, we are using like the back book Aries data, so we know how well credit unions serve different people by credit tier, by product type, race, ethnicity, income, all these different things. And the cornerstone of the analysis is really, we've made a risk-based member benefit statistic where we look at deposits. I will just say less interesting, but we do deposits too. But on the loan side, looking basically benchmarking pricing, but risk-based pricing on an individual originated account level. So we look at each loan product we provided our members, the credit score, the interest rate they were given, payment frequency, term, all these different things, so we can benchmark essentially your risk-based pricing against, and normally what we do is against the average bank over time. In this, we can benchmark it against every other credit union within the network, and then identify which credit unions would best serve the existing members of that credit union. And we should be able to identify credit unions who basically, like, if the members of a acquiree had actually been members of an acquirer, they would have more money today than they would have if they had joined the credit union they ended up joining. And it is a empirical sort of like data-driven approach that will show that the different acquirers the credit union then considers will do a very effective job of serving the members. We really want to avoid matchmaking. The whole purpose of this is to make sure that sort of mergers don't happen where an acquirer has a business model that really means they won't meet the needs of the members of an acquired credit union. We also have, and I cover this on the next slide too. We can just jump on the next slide, but We also have a over 50 question survey, so it is not just based on that analysis, but that analysis is a big component of it. But then we also work with credit unions to understand what the criteria is that they're looking for in a partner beyond that analysis. And then we do all of our, for acquirees and mergers of equals minority, we'll go through and basically whittle it down to probably 3 to 5 finalists for them to then get introduced to and explore a merger with, based on the ones that best meet their criterias and based on the data would best meet their members' needs. Next slide. And on the other side, it really starts out the same way. You're loading your data, we're mapping it, we're getting all the data configured to be able to do that benchmarking of business models and pricing against credit union to credit union. Again, defining ideal merger candidates, we don't want to make introductions where then the acquirer might say, you know, we have no interest in merging with, we may serve their members fantastically, they may want to merge with us, but generally I think the real answer would be they're too small for us to deal with this project, or they're outside of our footprint, or we don't want to merge with them. So we want to make sure we're making introductions where it is beneficial for all parties involved. Then CUCollaborate is out, honestly, trying to get this process out there, make people aware of it, so that credit unions who are interested in exploring mergers of equals as either a minority board representation or acquiree know that this process is available to them and can be confident that they will find the best possible merger partner by going through this process. And then we will introduce, we'll introduce the credit unions if they're selected by the acquiree as one of the credit unions that they'd like to receive pitches from, and make those introductions. And then the acquirers can make their pitch to try and go through the merger or get picked to be the merger partner. Next slide.
Next slide is Q&A.
All right. Well, that ends my
conference.
presentation then. Perfect. Yeah, if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat. You raise your hand too, we could unmute you. But
yeah, the deck and recording will be shared with everybody who registered. So expect that tomorrow. But we did have one question. Sam, how many CUs are currently registered in this network?
Very few. I would be like, I believe right now, 1. We are launching this. In some ways, that is scary if you're an early adopter. Also, I think that the people who adopt it earliest will probably get the most value. So it is a new thing, and we are building the network as we present this webinar, hopefully. So yes.
Thank you. What is a typical time frame for a merger start to finish?
Okay, that's so variable. I have seen credit unions in the phase of identifying a merger partner over the course of many years. Once you have begun the process of submitting for regulatory approval, that, again, like depending on the context, it could be like one of the quicker pieces of sort of the entire initiative. Getting the merger agreement in place ahead of getting ready to submit for regulatory approval is important. And I think in the merger agreement, you're going to have some like back and forth agreeing on the specific terms of the merger. To complete the merger package, again, it's going to depend on the bandwidth of your team. I think sort of like most straightforward packages can be compiled in 1 to 2 months. And then you enter a period of regulatory review. The review process, I would estimate taking about 5 months. Sometimes regulators will come back with questions that extends the process. And again, then your effective date can be contingent on a couple of things. So you have time from regulatory approval to effectuate the merger. Sometimes credit unions need to ask for extensions again if they're trying to get on their core vendor's calendar for that data migration. So a couple of different inputs there to timeline. As I shared, a lot of variability goes into it, but if you reach out specifically, like happy to kind of talk through, given the context that you have, what a more specific timeline might be.
Thank you, Emily. Emily, you also mentioned that the FTC needs to be notified in certain situations. What triggers that?
It's an asset threshold. I think the current threshold is 117 million. And it's important to note that there are certain assets that don't count towards that threshold. So the FTC publishes guidance on this. Unfortunately, I don't have the link at my fingertips, but kind of happy to share that out after this presentation.
Great. Another question from Melissa. Typically with a merger, the acquirer indicates autonomy for the acquiree. How often is that true?
I would say it has happened. I wouldn't say it's common. It is a thing that I've seen credit unions do to both maintain the brand. I think oftentimes it also involves like longer core contracts that they don't want to buy out, and a way of leaving the CEO of a acquiree in control of what they were sort of previously in control of. It could definitely be a requirement through that a acquiree would specify through essentially this is like an RFP process, through that process of what they're looking for in an acquirer. Hopefully that answers the question.
Question from Kathy. Although this is a new network for CUCollaborate, would you speak to the experience on the team dealing with M&A?
Luis, how long have you been studying mergers in the credit union bank space?
Luis is muted.
I have been studying credit union mergers since 2008.
And
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I've been guiding credit unions through the merger application process since I started with CUCollaborate 3 years ago. And I also work with our chief operating officer, who is our head of consulting. And he also has extensive experience with large consulting firms tackling some of the similar components to M&A.
Question from David. Can non-CU entities join the network? For example, a CDFI looking to merge with a credit union?
Not a thing that I had considered personally. I don't see why not.
What percentage of merger applications that you've worked on are actually approved by the NCUA?
This is a great question. 100% of the applications that we've submitted have been approved, with the exception of some things happen outside of the control of the approval process.
I was going to say, yeah, worked on and submitted are different.
Sometimes the relationship piece can be challenging, even if credit unions have really done extensive due diligence in identifying a merger partner. The benefits have been specified. As credit unions, again, like work towards a mutual understanding of the terms of the merger, things can devolve.
Thank you. And we're getting quite a few questions about pricing. I'm going to pop the meeting link in the chat again. We'd love to meet up with you on specifics, but there is one question asking about how is CUCollaborate compensated? in this process?
We debated including pricing in the slides. I personally feel I'm gonna share it. But we charge $12,000 a year, and it's a 3-year agreement. And that is it. There's no success fee or other piece for that. And that is charged to acquirers and credit unions that require having majority board representation. If you are an acquiree or minority board representation of a merger of equals, it is free.
Thank you all. I don't see any other questions. I'm going to pop the meeting link in the chat one more time if you're interested in learning more. And again, all of the slides and recording will be sent to everyone tomorrow. But if any other questions do come up, again, please reach out to us. We're happy to answer them. Unless there's anything else to add, I think that concludes the webinar today. Oh, well, a question from Chris. Sam views himself and CUCollaborate as a disruptor. How do you differentiate your services from others? Leave it to Chris.
I do think it's the member-based analysis. Call report data is helpful. It is publicly available, which is a huge benefit if you are doing a huge industry-wide canvas. But the actual back book individual member and actually individual account level data and doing that analysis, I think, is our big differentiator. We also have a bunch of data that other people don't have around field of membership and technology stacks that credit unions are on. But to me, our ability to really provide rigorous analysis that shows that a merger would be, in terms of dollars and cents, in the best interest of the members of a acquiree, it was, in my opinion, our biggest disruption in this space.
And we do have a question from Lois. Lois, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask. You should be able to unmute.
Can you hear me?
We can.
You can? Oh, hi, I'm from White Plains Post Office Credit Union. I put my question in the chat. What would happen to the charter? Because they're very difficult to come by.
Yeah, the charter, the two charters enter into a merger. One continues, it's called the continuing charter. The other one is discontinued. It simply disappears. Now, all the obligations entered by the discontinued charter are taken over by the acquiring charter.
So is that really beneficial to get rid of, is there a better way to merge without getting rid of the charter?
If you merge, one charter disappears.
And I think something, again, that I recommend sort of digging into is the FOM overlap. And again, the extent to which the two partners have that overlap means that the field of membership component is going to be retained. So again, like one organization is going to be dissolved, but the continuing institution, again, through the identification of an ideal merger partner, should be positioned to serve members with better products and services potentially, and kind of like, again, retaining some of the field of membership rules if possible.
What happens often is one of the two credit unions will remain as an operating division within the broader credit union. This is done for branding purposes. This is done to provide a sense of autonomy to the members and employees of the smaller credit union, but legally that operating division is part of the larger credit union, and legally the board of the overall credit union has legal control of all its parts.
Great. Thank you so much. Also, if you're a current client who has questions or would like to discuss further, Sydney popped in an email to the account management team. So please reach out to that email as well. But otherwise, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up today. Again, keep an eye out for the email with the slides and the recording. And if you have questions or would like to learn more, please schedule time with us. We'd love to connect with you. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending today.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.